Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Insight on Business, the News Hour. I'm your host, Michael Libby. It's all being brought to us by our friends at FWRSA. FWRSA, tax and accounting professionals that work hard for your business until the cows come home. Also, Bike World of Iowa, well, Bike World in Des Moines, Bike World in West Des Moines, and Bike World in Ames. It is the store that supports the sport. Lots of bikes coming to Des Moines tomorrow. As we okay? Our producer's giving me hand signals in the background there. This is interesting. Speaking about bikes, it took me to Cumming, Iowa last week. Every Tuesday night in tiny Cumming, population 551 people as of the 2010 census. Cumming, Iowa, it's about 8 miles south by bike trail, 8 miles south of Des Moines. And it is the home of the Cumming Tap. And the Cumming Tap is this little restaurant and bar in this tiny little town of Cumming, which is also the hometown of United States Senator Tom Harkin. And that's what it was best known for up until now. And so all of a sudden, there's hundreds of bicyclists that go every Tuesday to the Cumming Tap to eat tacos from our friend Sam Owen and Takalopoulos. I mean, hundreds of bicyclists. Well, with us on this particular Tuesday was a friend of Phil Bubb. And he said, hey, we ought to go across the street to the Iowa Distilling Company, and they're doing tastings of their new stuff. And I said, well, what are you talking about, the Iowa Distilling Company? I had no idea that this place existed. And so we went across the street, and here's an image of the outside of their building. This is what it looks like in Cumming, Iowa. This is the Iowa Distilling Company's building. It looks to be, it perhaps was an old general store or something like that. It looks to be a hardware store or something like that was in Cumming. And they've retrofitted this, and it is a tasting room and retail sales, and there still is in the back, and it's just wow. It is very, very cool. And with us in studio is Phil Bubb, one of the partners for the Iowa Distilling Company. Phil, welcome to Insight on Business. You're going to have to sneak way up close to that microphone.
Thanks very much for having us here.
Well, this is pretty incredible. So you were deluged last Tuesday with all these bicyclists. What was that like? Yeah,
we had there were only two of us at one point that were working the whole building, and we had a couple hundred people through there on Tuesday. So it was, it was exciting. We like having folks through. We like, pouring samples of things and having folks in the building. We're going to need to hire some more bodies, I think, to help man the tasting room and things like that here shortly.
Especially on Tuesdays.
Especially on Tuesdays.
The Cumming Tap has been this place, ladies and gentlemen, where people from the Des Moines and around go on Tuesdays to eat tacos. And I understand they also do something on a Wednesday night. So that's kind of been the economic driver of Cumming, Iowa, a population of 359 people.
Yeah, I think it's been the Cumming Tap, certainly in concert with it being a destination on the bike trail.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting I'd say a majority of the folks that stop at the distillery are there in some amount of spandex.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that we've just now installed a bike rack outside to make it a little more convenient.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
But absolutely, that's certainly what brings a lot of folks to our neighborhood.
Well, Phil, we want to get the backstory about the Iowa Distilling Company. Tell us what, and this is a trend, by the way. This is a trend that's going on all across Iowa, across portions of the United States. It started with wineries, people making their own wine, and then craft beer, and now it's morphed into distilling products. So give us a little bit of the backstory of Iowa Distilling Company. Are you a distiller by trade?
No, I don't. And I've read some numbers on that. Actually, I don't think there are a tremendous number of folks that are doing sort of micro distilling that are trained distillers or have second, third generation distillers. The way sort of Kentucky brags about having families,
generations of
that goes back to whatever. No, by trade I'm an attorney. And my co-owner business partner is a computer scientist. So between the two of us, we had not even chemistry background. But, I think you identified it. I think there's a trend right now toward more locally produced product. We're certainly seeing it on the distilling side, and we, my business partner and I, we just sort of got interested in the chemistry behind distilling. We were both whiskey drinkers, and started talking about how it's made and reading about how it's made, and went to some other distilleries to see how it was made. And after a couple of years of that, we decided to start off with some small equipment and see if we couldn't try our hand at making some.
Well, it is fascinating, the trend that's happened out there as people have gone through this process from wine to beer to craft beers, and now whiskey. My son, who's 33 years old, his name is Aaron. Aaron is fascinated by this, and not long ago purchased some moonshine, ladies and gentlemen, legally,
Yep.
from the store, and is aging it in a cask just to see if he can at least get that side of things going, and then he wants to do the craft distilling. But there's some real issues about getting started with this. This is a heavily regulated industry, isn't it?
It's intensely regulated. Again, my background was in law, and it still was, a very rough road to get all the licensing in place, and we're still occasionally a little nervous about whether we've got all of our process to match what the regulations are. But it's an industry that's governed by the federal. The federal government has its layer of regulations on it. Then your state government has its layer of regulations on it, and then obviously your municipality has to approve what you're doing out there. So, it took us almost a year and something like 600 pages worth of applications to finally have the right to run, to operate a still legally, and to make sure that the state and federal government get their revenue from it and all that.
Our guest in studio, ladies and gentlemen, is Phil Bubb. Phil is one of the partners at the Iowa Distilling Company. He doesn't come at this job with any past experience as a distiller. He's an attorney, for crying out loud. Well, you've been distilling things for some time, I would suspect. And your partner's Todd Rankin?
Todd
Dunkel, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Todd is a computer scientist.
He is.
And I was visiting with Todd last Tuesday, and I said, my son is kind of interested in distilling, and he says, well, if he buys something, the feds are tending to track some of the sales of distilling equipment. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, distilling isn't like making beer or wine at home, where you can, with beer or wine, you can make it for sort of your own consumption. You can make it so long as you're not selling it.
Yes.
In distilling, you can't operate a still of any size, making any quantity of distilled spirits without at least a federal license. And I think it's a source of confusion for a lot of people, because I think we get asked all the time at the distillery, how much am I allowed to make at home just for my own personal use? And the short answer is
none.
Not a drop. But I think the popularity of moonshine in television shows and things like that recently. There are companies that specialize in making the equipment used for distilling, and I think there's a lot of folks that are under the impression they can sort of buy the equipment, run the equipment, so long as they're not selling it, they're not running afoul of any regulation, and that's not the case. So what we were a couple weeks ago, we were informed by one of our equipment suppliers that the federal government was going through had subpoenaed all of their sales records, and were linking up who was licensed with who was receiving equipment. We got sort of just a heads up from the equipment supplier, and fortunately for us, it wasn't a problem.
No, of course not.
But they were saying something like they had they'd filled a few thousand orders, or a few thousand customers had been supplied with some type of equipment, and there's only a few hundred licensed distilleries in the country, so the math doesn't really work out for them.
So somebody's going to get a knock on the door, perhaps.
That's very likely.
As an attorney, in special practice of some kind?
Litigation.
Okay, so it's not defense.
No.
I guess my question would be, ATF, is it alcohol, tobacco, and firearms?
They've renamed it a little while ago.
Yeah.
It's now the TTB, the tax and
something.
Yeah.
And so they knock on your door and you've purchased a still. Gosh, how serious is that?
Well, I think it's pretty serious, and I think it's pretty serious at both I think it's both a federal and a state crime. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think you really, I've looked at the Iowa code, and I know there's jail time associated with some of this stuff.
Yeah, so you best be careful if you're wanting to home brew something other than beer or wine. Let's talk about the Iowa Distilling Company and where this whole idea came from. Why would you guys do something like this?
Well, we wanted to. First of all, I guess I'll go for the why and then the where later. The why was, I think, just an idea that anything that has this kind of history behind it, but allows for such creativity to it, is kind of interesting to me. I mean, I'm kind of a history nerd anyway, but we talked about how essentially the process hasn't changed much over at least the last couple hundred years, and I think there's a draw to it that way. Again, we'd been whiskey drinkers, and I think we had kind of always thought of things we'd like to try to change it subtly, and I think that's mostly what you're seeing now with sort of the trend toward micro distilling is a lot of folks that are just experimenting.
Well, you're right. You go to any well-stocked liquor store anywhere, and you see all kinds of infused stuff. With some really pretty creative names. As a matter of fact, there was a story not too very long ago. National Public Radio had this story where they're saying, you think you're going to manufacture beer or wine or whiskey, and you want to come up with some kind of a catchy title for it. You'd be surprised at how few and far between the ability to trademark some of those particular names are, because there are so many people involved in this that many of the names are already taken. So they're opting for names that don't really mean anything. You have two products on the whiskey side.
We do.
One is called Prairie Fire.
It is.
And
That's our cinnamon. I'm sorry.
Yep, that's your cinnamon whiskey.
Yep.
And then you also have something called
Iowa Shine.
Iowa Shine. Tell us about those two things.
Sure. Well,
and while you're doing that, we're going to show an image. Ryan, this is the inside of the distillery. An image of this. Nope. Okay. We don't have that image. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about the two products.
Sure. Most of our whiskey is either exclusively made from corn or at least heavily corn-based. Bourbon has to be a majority of it's got to be corn. Our Iowa Shine and our Prairie Fire are entirely corn. It's one of the reasons that we obviously lean so heavy on that is we've got access to the best corn we think on the planet, so might as well use it. And our Iowa Shine is a 100% corn whiskey. We double distill it to smooth it out a little bit. I mean, it kind of falls into the moonshine category because it's not aged. So it's as clear as water. We bring it down to 80 proof when we bottle it, and it ends up being I think smooth enough that you could drink it straight or mix it in cocktails, and sort of that was our goal with that product.
We're going to take a quick break. We're visiting with Phil Bubb from the Iowa Distilling Company, a relatively new company that's founded now in the city of Cumming, population of 351 people, about 8 or 10 miles south of Des Moines. We'll continue our conversation with Phil when we come back. This is Insight on Business, the News Hour. We'll be back right after this.